Right now, somewhere in the world, someone is holding a drink they didn't really need. Not for hydration, not for nutrition, just for the feeling. That feeling, the warmth spreading through the chest, the slight loosening behind the eyes, is not a modern invention. It is not even a human invention. It is roughly 10 million years old, and it may be the single strangest inheritance carried in the human genome. For most of history, the story people tell about alcohol goes like this. Humans learned to farm grain. Grain sometimes got wet and fermented by accident, and someone was brave enough to drink the result. Beer, in other words, was a byproduct of agriculture, a happy accident that came after civilization had already begun. That story has a problem. The timeline runs backward. 10 million years ago, long before anything resembling a human walked the earth, the ancestors of apes and monkeys were living in the forest canopy, eating fruit. Ripe fruit, left on the branch or fallen to the ground, does something predictable. It ferments. Wild yeast breaks down the sugar inside it and produces, as a byproduct, ethanol, the same molecule in a glass of wine. Most fermented fruit in the wild only reaches about 1 to 2% alcohol, barely enough to register. But the scent of that fermentation carries. And for a fruit-eating primate trying to find calories in a dense competitive forest, that scent became something valuable, a signal. It meant sugar. It meant food. Robert Dudley, a professor of integrative biology at the University of California, Berkeley, spent years trying to figure out why humans are so drawn to a substance that in high doses is toxic. In 2014, he published a book laying out an idea he called the drunken monkey hypothesis. His argument was that primates evolved a genetic attraction to the smell of ethanol, not because alcohol itself was rewarding, but because it reliably pointed toward ripe, nutrient-dense fruit. The animals that could smell fermentation from a distance found food faster than the ones that couldn't. Over millions of years, that sensitivity to ethanol got wired directly into the reward centers of the primate brain. So here's the pattern interrupt worth sitting with. Humans may not crave alcohol because civilization invented a vice. Humans may crave alcohol because their ancestors' ancestors' ancestors, dozens of generations removed from anything human, were rewarded for following a smell through the trees. For a long time, Dudley's idea was mostly theoretical. Then in 2022, researchers led by primatologist Christina Campbell at California State University, Northridge, tested it directly. Her team followed black-handed spider monkeys in the rainforests of Panama, collecting fruit the animals had bitten into and discarded. When they measured the alcohol content, some of it came in as high as 7%, not far off from beer. And when they tested the monkey's urine, they found ethylglucuronide and ethyl sulfate, the same chemical markers doctors use to confirm that a human has recently metabolized alcohol. The monkeys weren't just tolerating fermented fruit. Their bodies were processing real alcohol regularly as a normal part of eating. That's 10 million years of low-grade exposure, baked into primate biology long before a single human tool was made. But an appetite for a molecule in fruit pulp is a long way from a cup of beer. Something had to close that gap, and that is where the timeline gets genuinely uncomfortable for the standard story. In 1995, archaeologists working at a site called Göbekli Tepe, in what is now southeastern Turkey, uncovered something that shouldn't have existed yet. Massive carved stone pillars, some weighing over 10 tons, arranged into circular enclosures. The site dates back roughly 11,000 years, which placed it firmly before agriculture, before anything archaeologists had previously classified as civilization. Hunter-gatherers built it, people who, according to the old model, hadn't yet settled down or started farming. And scattered among the ruins, large stone troughs, some capable of holding over 150 liters of liquid. Residue analysis on those troughs, led by archaeologist Oliver Dietrich and his team, turned up calcium oxalate, a chemical signature left behind specifically by grain that has been soaked and fermented. Not baked, fermented. Now here's the turn the whole video has been building toward. If hunter-gatherers at Göbekli Tepe were brewing something like beer 11,000 years ago, and agriculture in that same region only shows up afterward, then the old sequence, farming leads to beer, has it exactly backward. The desire to keep brewing a fermented, mind-altering drink may be one of the reasons humans started deliberately cultivating grain in the first place. Not bread first, then beer by accident. Beer first, or something close to it, and bread is the consolation prize. The evidence isn't confined to one site. Half a world away, at Jiahu in China's Henan province, archaeologist Patrick McGovern examined pottery dated to around 9,000 years ago and found chemical traces of a mixed fermented drink made from rice, honey, hawthorn fruit, and wild grapes, essentially the earliest known cocktail, brewed by a population that had only just begun experimenting with farming. And thousands of years later, in ancient Mesopotamia, cuneiform tablets describe beer being used to pay workers. Sumerian laborers, building the earliest cities on Earth, were compensated in bread and beer, sometimes receiving several liters of it a day as part of their wages. Imagine that as an actual job offer today. A steady paycheck, partly delivered in alcohol because it was considered valuable enough to count as currency. Which raises the obvious question, why did fermentation matter enough to reorganize entire economies around it? Part of the answer is practical. Fermented drinks were often safer than untreated water, since the fermentation process killed off certain pathogens. Part of it was caloric. Beer was a dense, storable source of energy in a world where food security was never guaranteed. But part of it, almost certainly, traces straight back to that 10-million-year-old wiring, a reward circuit built by fruit-eating primates in the forest canopy, still firing in Sumerian brewers filling clay jars by the Euphrates. The chain runs in a straight, unbroken line. 10 million years ago, primates evolved to chase the scent of fermenting fruit through the trees. Roughly 11,000 years ago, hunter-gatherers at Göbekli Tepe were deliberately fermenting grain in stone vats before they had even settled into permanent villages. 9,000 years ago, brewers at Jiahu were mixing rice, honey, and fruit into something recognizable as a cocktail. And 5,000 years ago, Sumerian workers were being paid in the very thing their ancestors had been chasing since before there were ancestors to speak of. It didn't start as a party. It started as a smell in the forest that meant survival. Somewhere along the way, humans just learned how to make it on purpose.